let's talk about some players who could decide this thing. We usually do the offensive player of the game, defensive player of the game. This game, the last couple of years, we've kind of shifted to those guys. Like you said, it might not be an outlier. It might be the star player, but guys that will become those legends on either side, because Olave did so early on in his career. As you mentioned, J.J. McCarthy, Donovan Edwards. We didn't even know if Donovan Edwards was going to play last year. He had basically one hand. And then, as Jim Harbaugh said, he could have taken a knee. Instead, he wore a cast, and now he's a legend. Well, those guys are going to pop up on either side of this rivalry. I'll say for Michigan, if we start from the Michigan standpoint, it's pretty obvious, but like just the way things have gone the last couple weeks and going into this matchup, you're going to need JJ to be special. You're probably going to need Blake Corum to be special, and you're going to need the offensive line to play well. I'm naming some pretty obvious things, but I wrote Will Johnson down as well. I think he's going to have a big game, whether or not he follows Marvin Harrison around all game long. Because again, if he's not on Marvin Harrison Jr. and a couple other guys are, he's going to have to play lockdown on the other side. So it's going to be crucial that Michigan secondary holds up. I think the D-line getting pressure is going to be huge, and plenty of X factors, I think, to look at with this game.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the guys that need to have good games. First and foremost, I mean, Carson Barnhart the last few weeks has not been good. In fact, he's been pretty bad, and we tend to not dog on guys, but he's got to pick it up. Ladarius Henderson seems like last week was precautionary. Expect him back at left tackle. He has to have a good game. The tackles in this game are key to everything. Obviously, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, those are guys that you need to. We talked about this earlier this week in that Cornelius didn't have a great game at Maryland, but typically when he has those types of games, he pays it back with interest, which is something we saw in last year's Ohio State game. I'm thinking of other guys. Again, Josh Wallace is huge. Those safeties are huge. Mike Sainristil's huge. You could start being like Jim Harbaugh and go through the entire roster. Okay, got to play good to win the game. But I look at that Michigan offensive line and both tackles. I mean, I think that's the elephant in the room right now. That if what we see from them is what we saw the last 2 weeks, it's going to hamper their ability to go out and win this football game. So those are the guys to me that need to have big games to win that aren't obvious. Like, oh, well, JJ McCarthy can't throw a couple. Yeah, duh. JJ McCarthy has to play well. But, of the guys that we just spoke about, I think that it's the tackles that I'm going to be looking at the closest.
And then from the Ohio State perspective, I think a lot rides on how Kyle McCord handles this. We went through the numbers, him on the road, him under pressure. Well, he's going to be on the road on Saturday. He's going to face some pressure at different points. What kind of mistakes does he make? What kind of mistakes does either side make? Emeka Egbuka, for me, I think he was overrated coming into the year, but I think it's a huge matchup. Just you want to look at matchups in this game. Maybe one of the more underrated ones, but him against Mikey Sanders still. How that plays out. Like you said, Josh Wallace against Julian Fleming as well, if that's a matchup that we see at times. Tommy Eichenberg going to be back for Ohio State. I think they're going to, as Trevor Keegan said, he thinks they're going to do everything they can to stop the run. Maybe not everything they can, because we saw how that worked out at the end of last year's game. But I think they're certainly going to make that an emphasis. Obviously, it always is. Eichenberg will be huge with that. Denzel Burke in the secondary, who was talking pretty confidently this week. He said nothing about Michigan stands out on film. He said it's going to be about how we play. And it's not the worst quote, but his dad has flapped his gums in the past as well. Said before last year's game that they wouldn't lose. And I think we all know what happened, but any guys on Ohio State that you think could emerge as the players, whether we're talking about them after because Ohio State won, or because, maybe they didn't step up in the way that they need to against some of these Michigan guys in their matchups?
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of Michigan's tackles is that JTT and Jack Sawyer are guys that are keys for Ohio State. I think if Ohio State is going to find a way to win this football game, those guys will have to have good days for them. You look at the back end of that secondary, a lot of whiffs in coverage the last few years, some missed tackling, some coverage busts. Those guys are going to have to step up as well, because I do think that there's something to. I don't want to say Michigan has more big play ability at wide receiver than they did last year, but Roman Wilson's a guy that could house a reception at any point if he kind of, knifes up the sideline too. So that's going to be a key for those Ohio State guys. And again, that offensive line, I think that Jesse Minter and Mike Elston are going to throw the kitchen sink at those guys. And if Ohio State's offensive line is able to handle that, that's going to, I think, also kind of, if they're able to find ways to keep Kyle McCord clean, that's going to be bad news for Michigan.
I like how when we were talking to Zach Zinter on Tuesday night, he was kind of smirking a little bit when someone asked about, what do you think about the concept of saving plays or looks or formations or whatever against for the biggest game? And he kind of cracked a smile a little bit. He said, yeah, I'm sure they're doing that too. And, it's just kind of the way things go. And obviously Michigan has, and obviously Ohio State will in this game as well.